There is a lot of history to the Second Amendment. Today, there is a raging war of ideals between people who believe guns should be regulated and people who believe guns should be completely unrestricted. One might ask, well, why as a nation are people so divided? Well, this division did not happen overnight. In fact, it started as early as when the Constitution was being written, with the fight not being between the Democrats and Republicans, but being between the Federalists and the Anti Federalists. After declaring independence from the British monarch, the United States felt a fear of a centralized government. But after the failure of the Articles of Confederation, centralized government seemed to be the only option. The Federalists were for a strong centralized government and wanted the Constitution to be ratified by the states, but the Anti Federalists were against it. In order to have a centralized government, the Anti Federalists had a condition. They required that a Bill of Rights of 10 amendments be added to the Constitution to give rights to the people and hinder creation of an all powerful government like the one they had just fought to get out of. The Second Amendment is the right to bear arms, and is the one most directly related to the preventing of government tyranny. It advocates that if a government becomes too powerful or misuses power, it is the right of the citizen to have the means to fight back. Ultimately, this begins the idea of guns for protection against monarchical power. While there would be a lot of changes in the names of the two different parties, the main difference between them would be the argument of big government versus little government, which is the basis of the debate for gun control. There were little skirmishes here and there about guns and the rights they entail, and then came the threat of imminent terrorism. After 9/11, people felt scared in society and wanted security which guns could provide. Then came the mass school shootings and the recent shooting at Pulse nightclub. Ultimately, these current events brought out the hardcore differences that were seen in the Federalists and Anti-Federalists, but were now seen in the Democrats and Republicans. The Democrats are advocating generally for gun control in order to preserve peace and prevent further mass shootings and accidental shootings to children. They are closely related to the Federalists of the past who wanted a strong centralized government. The Republicans resemble the Anti-Federalists and generally want guns to be unrestricted because they see them as a way for protection against others and against a strong federal government. Ultimately, there are a lot of different ways to look at this issue in our day and time. Democrats will say that guns being unrestricted and widely available have led criminals to have access to actually causing terror. Republicans will argue that it is not the gun that causes the issue, but it is the person pulling the trigger, so we cannot restrict guns because of a few. Donald Trump agrees with the Republican Party on a less restricted stance for guns, and Hillary Clinton agrees with the Democratic position that guns should be restricted. Donald Trump actually, though, differs from his party. He, of course, argues and believes for a lack of restriction on guns, but he has one condition. He says there should be a ban on assault rifles. Both sides, they do have flaws to their arguments. Republicans fall to anti-intellectualism in their argument when they argue that Democrats are trying to take away all guns. This can be attributed back to the big government and small government issue. Republicans have a fear of losing the checking of power, so when they hear the government is trying to limit guns, it strikes fear that government is taking away the ability of people to check its power and the government is becoming too strong. Democrats fall to anti-intellectualism with their lack of knowledge of gun terms. As James Jacobs says, semi-automatic rifles are labeled assault weapons because of their appearance, not their mechanics. Democrats tend to clump military look-alike guns as if they are all the same and should be banned. So their position is hindered by their vague use of broad terms on weapons that aren't as dangerous as they make them out to be. Both sides fall to intellectualism because of the statistics each one uses. One party will use a gun statistic to prove that drunk drivers are more of a problem than people with guns, and the opposing side will say that in 2014, 1,049 people died to gun acts. So, both sides do fall to them because of the statistic each one uses. One party will use a gun statistic to prove that drunk drivers are more of a problem than people with guns, and the opposing side will argue against that. Before anyone, though, uses a statistic to prove their side, they need to make sure they know what their statistic means. With data being very available with the internet, it is very easy to use a statistic without actually knowing the details surrounding it. Ultimately, this and the threat to the nation's security post 9/11 and the recent examples of gun violence have led to a nation that is not coherent on this issue.